Thanks for tuning in to the final week of the Kings and Queens series here at City Church, a Q&A with Jim and Carmen Simpson hosted by our worship leader, Dylan Puckett. We are honored and blessed that you chose to join us for our online Sunday experience. Our intent is to share God's Word and reach the online viewers as well as our local community and church family. If you live in the greater Savannah area and do not have a church home, we would love for you to visit our campus at 1624 East 38th Street, Savannah, Georgia, on the corner of 38th and B Road. Don't forget, community and fellowship are crucial for growth in believers' lives, so don't be lazy and get yourself to church. If you liked what you've seen today and want to support the ministry, you can do so by going to citychurch.live or clicking on the link in the description.
Yeah, all right. What's going on, everybody? This is our first ever live City Church Q&A live podcast. So, oh, that's nice. That's nice. So today we've got none other than the Honorable Right Reverend Pastor Jim Simpson.
Quinn? Oh.
and Father Simpson and his wife Carmen. And then we've got Quinn producing, and then myself. So you had Q's, we've got A's. So you can check us out afterwards. This will be on YouTube. It'll be on our Facebook. It should be on podcast apps. You can check it out if you have any more questions or want to listen to it again. So without further ado, I guess it's time to get started.
You want to introduce the man behind the curtain?
The man behind Quinjamin Harris. We have Quentin.
Quentin, that's his favorite.
No, so Quinn is our. Quinn's going to be producing today. So if something comes to mind, we can't remember the article. He will fact check us and.
I'm just going to Google. That's it.
Yeah.
You can probably do the same.
So part of the appeal to doing it this way was that we felt like that, first of all, this is a format that if you're watching or listening to podcasts currently, this is a format you're probably already familiar with, versus what we feel like is a lot of times with standard Q&As, at least in the church setting, they tend to be like a question followed by more of like a mini sermon. Which it's okay at times, but what we wanted was something that felt maybe a little bit more casual, and so that's what we're going for.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And since we're talking about casual, we'll kick it off with a easy question. This was one that came in that seems the verdict is still out, and so I guess where do babies come from?
It's a good place to start. Do you know, Jim?
I'm not exactly sure on the data points, what the statistics are, but I think I've heard at least 90% of babies, maybe 95%,
at least
come from a womb, which only mothers are equipped with. Quinn, can you?
Don't look at me.
No. Can you fact check that? I mean, what percentage of babies?
I think it's 100.
I think it's
100%.
100%. Yeah.
So, but what's the deal? We were actually talking about this some yesterday. The verdict still isn't out, depending on who you ask. But what's the deal with? We were talking about like the stork bringing. Did anybody? I don't know if that's.
Yeah, there's no storks.
Or it's not like umbrellas like in the Grinch where a hard wind blows.
We didn't experience that.
It required
Okay, is there another question?
a man and a woman.
Well, let's then I guess we can go straight from that. When
Can I tell you, it's not boring.
Oh, that's all right. So let's.
So next question.
So I guess let's just dive right in with this then. I mean, if we're going from that, let's.
This is what Carmen does. Like when it gets awkward in the house, she's
I'll
like,
either pinch his leg. If you see me pinch his leg.
All right, let's
And
talk
then
about
let's
sex. When do
move
you
on.
talk to your kids about sex?
Wow. All right. We went straight
Or
in.
how do you? Yeah, I mean, so there has to be a difference. I mean, if they're asking about where do babies come from, you obviously don't want to just tell them. Maybe just. I mean, you don't. I don't think that like Ezra necessarily needs to know that, I mean, so when do you talk about?
Are you asking questions or answering them?
I don't know. I mean, so like when I mean, I don't know. Like when do you how do you handle that? What do you do?
Well, I
don't know.
mentioned this in the series when we started Kings and Queens, that Ezra actually, the week before Kings and Queens, asked the question. So we were riding down the road, and actually we were parking at Home Depot, and he was like,
But I think that goes along with the nature of children. Like, they ask a ton of questions. And so there's this natural curiosity. And so we decided long ago that we would create an atmosphere in our house where it's okay to ask questions. And the answers are either, you don't want to know that right now, or we'll answer truthfully. And so we actually had a child who we said, you don't want to, I don't remember what the question was, but you don't want to know this right now. And they pushed, and Jim said, okay, I'm going to tell you. And then upon the answer, they were like, why did you tell me that? And we were like, we told you you don't want to know right now. And so it's kind of been like the theme.
His testimony within the home has empowered a lot of the other children to stop asking when we say you don't want to know.
And then we'll say there is a time to know that, or we'll say.
So I'll say this: there has not been a birds and the bees talk in our home.
Ever?
No, because you cannot answer that question in its entirety in one conversation when the child asks. And this is the problem that even for myself I got into, is I had one conversation with my dad riding home from my grandmother's house. It was really odd. My sister and I had spent the night, and then my mom and dad show up in two cars. It's like, that's not normal. And they were like, we're going to ride in separate cars. We need to talk to each of you. And, my dad proceeded to tell me things that have forever scarred me. Sorry, Dad. And embarrassed me, because I repeated some of those things. And at school. And it was bad. And because it was, my dad went for more of like what do you call it when you're like this is kind of what it's like, not exactly what it's like. An analogy.
I don't know.
And it involved, anyway.
Yeah, we can move on.
But what Carmen and I have realized is that it's not a conversation that takes place that equips them. Instead,
it's a series of conversations.
Yeah, it's a lot of conversations. And so I would think that our kids would, one day when people are talking about this idea of the conversation, that they would go, you know what, it really was something that was kind of trickle-fed to us as our maturity matched the conversation. We got more information. But it is not something we shy away from.
So it'd be different depending on just almost basically every child, is what you're saying even.
Definitely.
Yeah.
When Ezra asked, he got, I did not say, ask me that again in a few years. I started with that there are several ways that it can take place, but that there is a right way and a best way. And we believe that wholeheartedly. And the best way is a mom and a dad. And that mom and dad are committed to each other, and they are in love and married, and that was the initial part of the conversation. I will also tell you, I don't find it's my responsibility to teach my children what culture says sex is, because I don't agree with culture's way. And so when culture's like, you got to teach them all the different ways and blah, that's why would I do that? Like, why would I I'll tell my kids that hey, there's great ways for you to destroy your life. Let's sit here and have some conversations around it.
I think there's also different levels to the conversation. There's the just even as a student knowing like anatomy. There's also as a believer knowing what Scripture says, and then there's also just on an emotional healthy level knowing what the spiritual ties are, that are involved and everything. So there's different levels to the conversation too.
So, with me, I similarly just had a conversation, which is something that I just sort of assumed just happens. So to hear that it's a series of conversation is just a different perspective for me. So I guess as someone unmarried, doesn't have kids, who's maybe, I've heard a lot about what parenting is like. What are some things maybe that you heard about parenting that on this side of, from 17 years into it, you've just found out, like, oh, like, that's not true, or sort of like parenting myths, if you will?
I'll start from the very beginning with the birth of my first child. While I was pregnant, I had moms just come up to me and be like, it's going to be so beautiful. And they would be like, I cried when I saw my baby. It was like this, like they made it sound like it was this magical moment. And my first labor with Isaac, well, I didn't have a second labor, just to clarify that. Like my labor with my first child.
It would have been
9 pounds,
it would have been
9
some
ounces.
time later.
Yeah,
I think.
he was 9 pounds 9 ounces, 23 inches long. He was a big kid, and and I was in labor over 24 hours. And I did not approach my options with child delivery. I did not fully know my options. Just a shout out to Marissa, the doula. She's very knowledgeable, and she's awesome and amazing. Had I known her or someone like her in my life, I would have known my options. But anyway, so I went kind of through like what to do, like what to think instead of how to think. And anyway, all that to say, I was exhausted and frustrated with myself and not feeling the happy, magical moment. And so literally, like when he was born, the doctor or nurse, whoever went to hand it to me, I was like, you've got to let his dad hold him because I have no strength. I have to catch my breath. So like I was expecting magical moments right there at the very beginning that I did not encounter. And so I thought something was wrong with me. So that was definitely a myth. I think that it can happen, that it can be magical for moms, but.
Yeah, and I think that, magical is in relation to other moments, right? And, while we're thankful for the moments that our children came into the world, they have by no means been the best moments with our kids. We've had moments that, if I'm sitting here and giving you a list of the most incredible moments that we've had, that experience isn't on there, for me anyway.
Yeah, and then
I've got one. I think one of the things for me, trying to be a believer and also, living in the world we live in, is I think that I really struggled at first with this idea that I think it's like this. It's like this battle that's taking place between the church and culture, and that is, you need to be a parent. No, you've got to be their friend. No, you've got to be a parent. No, you've got to be a friend. And we see this portrayed in, so many different areas. I go back to that scene in Mean Girls where Amy Poehler is...
Which is a reference of parenting?
Yeah, she's a great parent. Maybe in real life, I'm just saying in the movie.
Yeah, I have no idea.
She's, trying to drink with her teenagers, and, they're portraying this comical idea that, it's better for, if my children are going to drink, it's better for them to drink at home and do it with me. And I've heard people say that, and that's just lazy parenting. Is what we've realized. That's just a myth. Like, if you think like, well, if my kids are going to mess with these things, I'd rather them do it. It's like, train your kids to do what's right, fight for them to do what's right. Don't create opportunities for compromise. And what I've realized is that this myth of like trying to be their friend and trying to be their parent, it's not that at all. It's that, I am their friend and I am their parent, both at the same time. And what's helped me with that too is aging. My mom and my dad, there are moments where we have conversations that feel very peer-to-peer. But I'm going to tell you, when I'm walking through a season of life where I'm experiencing hurt, there's just nothing like calling mom up and crying on the phone. And I can be 40 years old and do that, and she'll vouch for that, because she's always mom. Like, she's always a parent. He's always dad. Now, yeah, we can go and have dinner and have a good time and have that friend peer, but at the end of the day, they're still parents. And me experiencing that with my mom and dad, I think has helped me with, to be able to comfortably walk in the capacities of, being able to play video games and shoot Nerf guns with the boys and go on walks, at the beach with my daughter, or, cook a meal, but also to be able to parent when something's out of line or when they're hurting.
Right on. So, with those, debunking these myths out of, have there been any, I don't know, sermons or books or articles or any type of resource that you found along the way that you have found helpful that opened your mind or like taught you a new perspective or anything like that?
In my early years of being a mom, I discovered a proverb that I have hung on to since then. And there are other resources, we'll get to them, but I wrap my mind around this, that in Proverbs it says that folly is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. And so
We've
that word,
quoted that many times.
that word folly means
right hand
literally
of fellowship.
instances of foolishness. If you've worked in kids ministry or you've been around kids, you know there are instances of foolishness, right?
Oh, for sure.
But the anecdote to it, like the balance to it, is that rod of discipline. And there's different forms of discipline. Sometimes it just takes a conversation. Sometimes there's more than that it takes.
So do you spank your
I
kids?
don't remember which Proverbs that is. Will you look it up? We quote it
Proverbs.
all the time.
Yeah.
What's the
Folly
quote?
is bound in the heart of a child. Yeah. So Jim, the question is, do we spank our kids?
Do you spank your kids?
Okay, so let me back up from that, because this is when we're talking about resources.
Proverbs 22:15.
22:15.
Proverbs
So
22:15.
if you want to write that down, 22:15.
Yeah.
So let me tell you something. Every child is different. Every parent is different. Every marriage is different. So this is why I am so reluctant to do parenting series and stuff, is because if you just go home and go, well, this is what Jim does, this is what Carmen does, these recipes don't always work.
It's not a one-size-fits-all.
It's not a one-size-fits-all. So this is why when it comes to resources, I personally struggle with what I call Christian living books. I don't find a lot of value in a book written by a believer on how to parent, because my kids are different. And I know that I'm not trying to shame people who write them. I just don't personally find a lot of value in them. So coming back to this idea of like scripture, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. When our kids do something foolish, Carmen and I remind ourselves, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. Our children will do foolish things. The rod, yes, we discipline our children, and we, as barbaric as our culture will say that it is, we have spanked our children before. And
I'd like to explain that process.
yeah, absolutely.
So, and this is the way that I was raised. This is what I have found success in, is when a child gets in trouble in our home, one of our children, we will send them to their room, and then we'll calm down out of the emotion that it invokes in us, whether it's anger, frustration, whatever. We'll calm down. So in a moment separated from that emotion, we'll go in and say, do you understand why you're in trouble? They have to repeat back to us why they're in trouble. And we have the conversation until they land on it, whether they didn't get it or whether they don't want to admit it. We'll have the conversation until they land on the confession of what they did. And then from that point, the consequence is this. The consequence to your choice right now is a spanking, because choices have consequences. That's the main point we want them to walk away with. That when you grow up and you break the law, you don't just walk away. There are consequences for that. And so then after the spanking, then we calm down, and then we have another follow-up conversation. Do you understand why you got a spanking? Do mom and dad want to spank you? No. There are choices, there are consequences to your choices. So it's a process, it's a conversation, it's working through the emotion of it. And it actually, as they grow, there are less and less and less and less spankings needed.
Honestly, there have been...
It's so few and far in between.
They really have been. That is not like our go-to. And I think that probably the issue that a lot of people have with spanking is that is the unchecked version of it that so many have experienced.
Yeah,
We
my,
don't-
my experience is a little different. Not that, my parents never hurt me, but
Right.
Yeah.
there was that type of conversation. That's a very different process than.
We don't use any type of tool or anything, paddle or whatever, because and the thought is you can't feel how hard you hit, but when you spank, it hurts your hand. You can feel how hard you hit with your hand. But growing up in South Alabama or South Georgia, the switch is a thing. I've never had a switch.
Yeah.
So
My grandmother let me. She empowered me to go get my
get
own
one,
switch.
dude.
yeah.
Dude, I know all. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know
that
about
was not a
that.
normal part of.
Yeah.
Go get a switch.
Yeah, yeah.
And
yeah.
then this was too small.
That's right. I had that happen once. I learned that real quick.
Oh, actually, I did.
Go get another one.
My mom did get a switch one time from a weeping willow tree, and it was so flimsy it tickled. So I was little, and we were outside, and she was like trying to catch me and switch me, and I was laughing and running from her, which did not go well for me.
So,
Yeah.
so I can tell you the primary form of discipline in our home, yes, consequences are always a part of it. But the primary form is always a logic-based conversation with every single one of our children.
Really?
Logic and problem solving and reasoning are the most critical parts of how we raise our kids. And we want to help them break through circular reasoning and, straw man arguments. We want them to pull through and discover truth. And so every one of them from very, very young we really push to, was that the best decision? And then why do you feel like maybe it was or it wasn't? And helping them to be able to discover what is right and wrong. They need to be able to figure that out in the way that they reason. Because if they don't, what happens is they act impulsively, and then once they've acted impulsively, they might know, oh man, that was wrong, so now I'm going to get in trouble. That births deceit, which means that now, because I act impulsively, because I haven't been trained to think before I act, I only recognize when I fail. I need to keep this a secret because I don't want to get in trouble. We, to this point, again, reluctancy and some of the things we say, but to this point, we do not wrestle with lying in the home. Our kids can do something wrong, and they'll just go, yeah, I did that. I'll use an example. Ezra will sometimes sneak and go get candy, right? And we'll be like, where did all of these empty candy wrappers come from? And Ezra will go, I got them.
The boy's a gremlin.
It was me. And we'll say, well, who told you you could? And he'll go, nobody.
God did.
Yeah. And we don't
The
get any of that. And we champion that. Let me tell you though, we recognize when hard honesty is brought forth, we champion it and tell them. Let me tell you, first of all, I could not be more proud of the fact that you're standing here owning your mistake. Now there are consequences for what you did. Those consequences would be much dire had you lied to us, but you sat here and told the truth. So getting to some resources, probably non-traditional in the sense of what you probably would hear a lot of people say.
Because you were saying logic and reason. Is there any?
So one of the books that we have used, and this comes from their school curriculum, is called The Fallacy Detective. Carmen, I'll let you talk a little bit about it.
I actually don't know who the author is, Quinn, if you want to pull the Fallacy Detective. And it goes through, each chapter this is used for 7th grade level learning in our home for logic. And the whole idea is, at that age, middle schoolers, they're going to argue. Like, naturally, you did it with your parents, your kids are going to do it with you. So teach them how to argue well. And so the Fallacy Detective, each chapter unpacks a fallacy in logic. So for example, like the straw man fallacy. And then it gives examples, and it's a fun little exercise. And then at the end of that chapter, there are actually workbook questions that you can talk through with your child. And there's several chapters. They're very short. We read it in 10 minutes a chapter. And then it translates into, when there are arguments coming up in the home, we're detecting the fallacy and the logic. We're unpacking how, the conversation, what's the meat of the conversation, and sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's, it just is what it is. The fallacy detective.
Don't think that we don't have those moments where it's like, okay, they're not getting it, so you're going to do this because dad said, or you're going to do this because mom said. It still happens.
Yeah.
But our first goal is to get them to identify why the process is right. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of all ages of the kids. For our little kids, we I mean, we did like VeggieTales. I'll tell you, I trained myself how to get ready in the length of a VeggieTale movie. Like when it was time to get ready for church, I'm like, stick the VeggieTale on, zoom through. Okay, VeggieTales is over. It's time to go.
This scene, I've got 5
Yeah,
minutes.
so like Christian resources, right now media is a great one, and just for being here in City Church, we can make that available to you.
What is Right Now Media?
So Right Now Media is an online platform very much like Netflix and Hulu, and the church pays a monthly subscription that covers everybody that is at City Church. And so those of you who are guests today, when you fill out that digital connect card, we send you the link to get it. It doesn't cost you a penny. They don't get a credit card on file or anything. You literally will enter in an email address and a password that you create, and you'll have access to tons of teaching, curriculum. There's
I need to
loads.
shoot me an email.
Yeah,
It-
if you're a
you should
home
check your
person at
emails,
City
Dylan.
Church, it's for you too. Be sure to find that out.
Yeah,
but
so-
it's everything from preschool and nursery all the way up through like adult, like
Content.
Bible studies and whatever, and it's all there on the media.
So those are the types of things that when it's bedtime and the kids want to watch something going to sleep, we'll have this idea of a little give and take, and we'll say, well, you can watch something in these categories. So, we might not let them fall asleep watching Avatar. We watch that as a family. But at time to go to sleep, we'll give them some choices. And one of the things that we've discovered in that is that our kids actually discover teachers that they like, and they actually will go to bed listening to sermon series or like community group curriculum from teachers that they're connecting with. So
And then, so that's available for the little kids too. And then for high school, right now we're going through a book called Do Hard Things. And I got the authors wrong yesterday. Quinn, what is it? Do Hard Things. It's twin brothers that wrote the book while at 18 years of age.
It's Brett and Alex Harris.
Brett and Alex Harris. I was going to say Seth.
Harris.
There's not a Seth. It's Brett and Alex Harris. And it is a teenage rebellion against low expectations. And that's the premise of the book. It's amazing. It's challenging me as an adult, just in mindset and perspective of life. Just to kind of step up.
So you mentioned fallacy detective and the curriculum. So, I mean, most of us know, so y'all homeschool.
we homeschool 3 of our 4 kids right now.
So one of the questions that came in was, I guess, how did you arrive at that decision? Why did you choose to homeschool as opposed to?
Well, when we were leaving the hospital with Isaac, and I was really overwhelmed and not feeling the magic, Jim turned
She
to
did
me.
want Popeye's chicken, though.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Good, bro.
So he brought me Popeye's chicken and was like, "Hey, babe, we need to homeschool." But he literally, as we were leaving the hospital parking lot, was like, "Hey, you should homeschool our kids." And I was like, "You are kidding me! Like, I just don't even know what's
I
happening
don't
right
remember
now."
it like
In
that, but
Yeah.
In the
go
park,
with
like,
that.
And,
you're going home, and you said
We were
that?
going home like with a newborn.
Sounds like an immature
Yeah.
dad.
Yeah. And I was like, let's just see how life goes, because my strength is
We'll see.
not in organizing and like planning, and in different ways it is. But like I have friends who are strong in that.
Yeah, so our issue is not with the idea of our kids being educated publicly. That was never really the issue. Carmen and I both taught abstinence in the public schools from a grant that was provided by Bill Clinton. I think he felt it was important to teach abstinence to somebody.
To 5th, 6th, and 7th graders. Yeah.
No judgments here. It paid our way through school. And so we were on the front lines of hearing things kids were saying at 6th and 7th grade about sex, and some of the stories I personally really wrestled with that. I'll tell you, so in high school, I was actually a pretty good kid in the sense of I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs. Carmen's the only person I've ever intimately been with. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria and some of the guys at the table talking about a party and hoping to get a girl drunk enough that they could, rape her. And it just that I felt so angry at that that I tried to I tried to tell the girl, and she told me to mind my own business. And I don't know. Maybe it's just me again. This isn't to shame anybody who's doing things differently. I just personally just have always felt like I want my kids to experience life a little bit different than some of those moments.
And I think this comes back to like every person's different, every parent is different, every home and every marriage is different.
We've all had different experiences.
Yeah, we've all had different experiences. And then, so if you fast forward from the time where Jim's like, you should homeschool our kids, to when it was time for now all of our kids went to preschool. I think minus Ezra.
The first two, yeah.
So he went to preschool, and then it was time for him to start kindergarten. And we were youth pastors at the time, and so as youth pastors, our life was pretty busy at night, and we kind of like lived for the youth events and everything. And so as a home situation, I was going, I can either come home at 7 o'clock every night and be putting our kids to bed, and you can be doing your own thing in ministry, or I can be side by side with you, and we can just create our own home schedule. That was more of my heartbeat, is like, I want to be side by side with him. So we created our own family atmosphere and calendar to where we could do life together and include our kids in that. So that, I see that as like the deciding factor of why I chose homeschool. And then even like down to like the curriculum and everything that we chose, there's all like a story to that. But each year following that, we asked Isaac and we asked Caitlin as they grew, do you want us to put you in school and find a school for you, or do you want to homeschool? So it became their decision, and they every year were like, we want to homeschool, we want to stay home, we want to do this, we want to live this life. And so it's just something that I kind of see like unfolded kind of from that decision. So
one of the questions that came in, I think would be interesting. It would be a little different considering that they're homeschooled. Do you have any advice or any insight about children who experience, whether it be in preschool or later, with dealing with bullying?
Yeah, I mean, I dealt with a lot of bullying as a kid, and I'm pretty open and honest about that. I wore glasses. I didn't have the hottest fashion.
Stepped your game up since then, boy.
I have worked on it
those
a little
shoes?
bit. I buy the shoes today. I wasn't allowed to as a child. I'm living vicariously. So I just, I routinely was called names. You see in a movie, it's funny because we'll watch a movie with the kids and I'll see a kid being picked on and I'll just be like, oh my gosh, those are the same things they used to say to me. Like somebody's writing that out of experience. Right. And I was bullied pretty hardcore. I got beat up a few times as a kid by bullies. I think that the most important thing is my mom and dad helped me see who I was, helped me identify who I really was, and when I don't want to say through the lens of somebody else, I was able to identify who I was and my potential looking through my own lens. So I didn't, while it hurt, when people would say those things, it didn't necessarily become so overwhelming to me, because my mom and dad did a really good job of, countering that all the way through. That a little bit changed when I got into high school. I was always somebody who loved Jesus. So that really became about the only thing I was made fun of in high school for. Some of the kids would call me Bible thumper because I always had a Bible with me. And I was dating Carmen, and my response would be, my girlfriend's prettier than yours. And it was always true. And Jesus helped me not to have to settle, and
Roll Tide, man.
That's what I would say. And
so
I would
are you saying if a kid
back.
is being bullied, get a pretty girlfriend? Is that what you're saying?
Ask Jesus for a pretty girlfriend.
So I would say
she was not a nerd. Now it's a little bit different, because now we champion the things that I was into as a kid. I was into comic books, and that wasn't cool, and I did art, and that wasn't cool.
That's come around.
And now it's like, it's like, oh man, everybody, that's the cool thing. You know what I'm saying? Wearing odd clothing that your mom bought for you is cool now. And it's okay, Mom. I still love you. So.
I think too, like, understanding that situation as a parent, like if your child is being bullied, understand that as a guardian, you are the first level of advocacy for your child. And so finding out the situation, be proactive to understand what all the elements are. Also really understand that it's a reflection of who that child that is doing the bullying, like there's something going on in that kid, which probably stems from something going on in their home, like there's just, but I would say like as a parent of a child who's being bullied, like really step up and know that you're the first level of advocacy, and then just assess the situation, and from there reach out and get resources from there.
So it's not like taking them to the park, like show me who it is and you're going to fight them.
Have we ever done
My
that?
dad did do that once.
No, that's it. I do not endorse
Now,
that.
in our situation with Zoe, he has some special needs, and he's just strong as a person and in his perspective of himself, and he's extroverted. He has not ever noticed if a child was being mean to him necessarily, but as he grew and we'd be at the park, like kids are just honest. So kids would walk straight up to us and be like, what's wrong with him? Like just super blunt, or what happened to him? Or I don't want him to touch me, I'll get what he has, or something. And so like hearing all those statements, I would just watch him kind of like not even know that they're saying that. But if someone would say, what's wrong with your legs? I taught him to answer for himself, and I said, all you have to do is look at them in the face and say, my brain learns differently than yours. Do you want to play? And so that's what he would do. So he would answer their question and then go on with it from there.
Yeah, you can tell a lot too, though, when a child at a park says something like that, and they're in front of their mom and dad, and the mom and dad either go, what are you going to do? They're kids, or they just, sit there quietly. You can tell a lot about the insufficiencies they're dealing with themselves.
Sure.
Because I'm going to tell you what, one of my kids said something like that, and we'd be having a come to Jesus meeting, because that's not how we've raised them to talk to people.
Like if something's happening at an organization like school or a sports event or whatever, definitely connect with the leadership that's there and find out what the values of that place are, who's in charge, who's catching what's going on. We've had to walk through some of that in a certain situation.
So let me go back to the idea of logic and reasoning. This is where sometimes that can have a swing that can sometimes feel a little bit negative, and that is that my kids are very quick-witted, and so
they'll punch you with words.
Yeah. So if somebody's at the park and says something like that, it's not uncommon for one of their siblings to very quickly dismantle that person's entire identity in a single statement. And they speak with truth. They just are able to say, this one thing that's true. And what we've had to do is we have to constantly pull that back, and we have to constantly say, hey, what you said might have been truth. Was it necessary?
Yeah. Everything we say should be true, but not everything that's true needs to be said.
And a lot of times, and that'll come all the way across to even, in our home, our children will literally watch YouTube videos of individuals having meltdowns over political ideologies, just so that they can laugh at them and call out the fallacy of their thinking. And I'll walk in and they'll be sitting at the table playing a video on loop of somebody who's, melting down over, I don't want to hurt anybody in here's feelings, but over something political or cultural, and they can just, because of that, they can pull the fallacy right out and say, man, this person does not understand reality. I read that is a tendency of Gen Z in general. So the children in our church right now are what we call Gen Z. I'd encourage you to go look that up. There are a lot of resources out there on that. And I find that a lot of the way that our children are acting lines up with that mentality.
So how old are they? How high does that go?
So
do you know?
So it's the breakdown, I think, is right now we have 19 and younger are Gen Z. Last year was the first year, I think this is right, that we had the last age group. No, I'm sorry. Yeah. Last year was the first year that we had Gen Zers, quote unquote, in the workplace. So having been out of high school, we have our first year of Gen Z in the workplace. And it's also the first time in history that we've had 4 generations working simultaneously, because we've seen an increase in the span of life. And so you have baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z all working together. And what's interesting is when you look at really their ideologies, the way they view the world, and you pair that up into the workplace, it has some interesting side effects, some commentary in itself. But so we have to pull back and say, hey, what you've said might be true, but it doesn't necessarily need to be said. And this is actually something I would say that we commonly come back to is, I know what you said is true, but is it necessary to be said?
We definitely want them to think critically and be able to state their opinion and state their view, but without, but not from a place of arrogance.
So I'll kind of end this idea with this. A lot of times people will ask the question, what do you do when your children are struggling with their faith? The whole reason that the whole vision for City Church that God gave us was to establish a place where truth is very openly and honestly said from the platform, but also that to have an environment that children want to be at. We want to have an environment in our children's ministries and in our sanctuary right here that kids want to be in. So, I don't know what every parent's experience is. We'd love to hear some feedback on that, but we are really trying to break this gap that happens when a child graduates from high school and then all of a sudden they're quote unquote supposed to go into big church, and they're like, I don't care for what's happening in big church. And so that is why we do the lights and the music and things are louder, and it's because we want to make sure we're creating environments that engage our children. As we teach our children to be logical, as we teach them to be people who are problem solvers, what we believe, let me tell you, I believe Jesus is the way. Deepest parts of who I am, Jesus is the way. He is the only way. And as critical as it might sound to people, oh man, you're slamming other faiths. I have a responsibility to help my children see that Jesus is the way. Because of that, we don't wrestle with, in our home thus far, we haven't wrestled with a lot of this faith, like, well, what if God's not real? Our children have the ability to use logic and reason to test and see. And on our own, I'll just brag on Isaac for a moment. He just came off of a 30-day fast that he just came in and said, I'm going to do a 30-day fast. I want to hear from God. And we were like, okay. And so we had to work with him for that period of time to make sure that the things he was fasting were, that other things were made available for him. And he regularly will do that, not because we're sitting here going, we're having a fast and we're dragging him in. It's that he's learning how to test and see. And so we haven't experienced a lot of that. And so the environments that we have here are meant to be those that are engaging, that are life-giving, life-building. It's why I tell people all the time that if I weren't the pastor, I'd still go to City Church, because I actually enjoy it. Not that there's not room to grow, but I really love this place, and I love the people who are here. And my kids beg to come to church on Sunday. They can't wait.
Cool. Well, I think that's all the time that we have. I think we've gone a long way.
Okay.
So thank you, Jim and Carmen, for being willing to just sit down and have the conversation. So we love you guys. We appreciate y'all. Yeah.
All right.
Let's
Thank you guys. All right.
yeah.
We're gonna-
Let's give them a round of applause. Yeah.